Hey guys. Uh, cool. Well, so this is an interesting, different sort of game. Hi, Cher. Do you want to be on the show? Hey, come, come here. You got ears. I can see your ears. Okay, well, that's good enough. Um, this is certainly a different. Hey, don't come on, camera setup. This is a different kind of game than even Hotline Miami, which was a very shooter focused action game, as opposed to the first two games that we did. Um, this is a really interesting sort of different style of game that the age is really sometimes difficult to deal with, and you sort of have to expect that, I guess. Um, all right, questions. What aspects of 1990s level design do you think need to make a comeback in modern shooter design? What aspects of modern level design have you missed during this playthrough? That's good. So, I don't play a ton of shooters, is the thing. And especially in this era, in like 1998, I was not playing Half-Life. Um, I've played, the first few Halos, and I've played like the more modern Fallout games, and I played Spec Ops: The Line. So I've played a few shooters, but I haven't played enough to like really have a great sense of them. Um, I feel so. My perspective as like a casual shooter player is that they've come a long way. They've improved in a lot of ways. They've evolved. Um, I appreciate that they are more open to new players. Whereas I feel like this game has like a pretty high initial difficulty curve. Um, and I'm playing on easy and I'm able to get through it just fine. But especially some of the elements that are not made perfectly clear um, are clearly designed towards people who either already speak the language of the game or are kind of more into the idea of bashing their head against a physics puzzle until it works. Whereas a more casual or a new player would have a lot more trouble with that. And I think modern shooters tend to be more cognizant of those new players and what an initial player experience looks like. Um, I, you know, Again, I can't speak to them really well, like comparatively, but I know some of the background of Halo. Halo does a ton of user research testing in order to make their difficulty curves as smooth as possible. And you go back to Halo 1, and there's still like weird spikes that today would seem totally out of place. But they were much smoother than competing products at that time. So that's something that I think we're seeing, is that like there's a real effort to smooth out those difficulty curves. Half-Life is doing a really good job of keeping me stocked up on health and ammo. Like I'm actually really impressed considering the age of the game. I feel like it's got these essentially checkpoint moments that remind me of something like Left 4 Dead, that really they come quite frequently. And we'll see if that keeps up. The game's idea of increasing difficulty might be to start sort of making those items more scarce halfway through. I don't know, but so far it's actually been like really nice, and I like the level design. Like I say, the use of loops through this complex, the reuse of space, it's evocative to me of like an anthill. If you picture what an anthill looks like, in 3D, and there have been some really cool visualizations where I think there are actually even pictures or maybe video of people who have like poured concrete down an ant nest and then dug up the 3D like structure of all of the interconnecting tunnels. Don't mess with my microphone, please. Hey, hey. Um, and so Black Mesa kind of reminds me of that. It's this very like interconnected paths that go back, trace back on top of each other and do all sorts of crazy things. It's got this really like, anthill feel to it. I think that's awesome. I don't. Uh huh. Uh huh. I don't think it's necessarily like appropriate for all games. I don't think it's something that should be standard language in all level design, but it's a neat thing to have, and it's neat when it happens, and it's neat for a game like Half-Life to be sort of built around that idea. It gives it a personality, I think. So that's cool. Sorry, looking for this game seems to require a lot of experience with similar games. Do you think it can be useful for a game to require a certain initial skill level from its players, or should all games at least try to accommodate new players? Yeah, that's tricky, and it's a balance because what you get from assuming a certain level of literacy from players is that you can expand the language. You can introduce sort of new ideas and new concepts that build on old concepts. Whereas if you're starting from scratch, if you're assuming zero literacy and trying to just build up a base level of literacy, then you're limited. Like you tend to be pretty limited to just doing that. So I think we need both kinds of games. I think games need to advertise pretty well what kind of game they are, and they also sort of need to pick what kind of game they're going to be. I would love for a game to come to me and say, hey, look, I'm going to be a really great experience, but in order to play me, you really ought to go play X game first, because that's going to teach you the basics. And that's a classic. That's a genre-defining game that that a lot of gamers play. But this isn't a good jumping in point. This is a point where you should have played some other things first. And so I'm not going to like totally hold your hand through the beginning, because I'm going to assume that you have played this. But be upfront about that, right? Like if a game actually told me what sort of the prerequisites for playing it are, personally, I would appreciate that. Now, AAA games run into a problem where they're really, really, really expensive. And so they need to try to make as much money as they can. And one of the ways that they do that is they try to have as big an audience as possible. And a lot of the times that means, like, let's make our game as accessible as we can. Let's build that initial literacy. But even when it doesn't, we need to market our game as though it were accessible to everybody. So that we can get new people to sort of jump in. And that can be frustrating, but I understand the necessity of it. Or I understand at least sort of where that motivation comes from. I think ideally we would have plenty of games that are really, really scaffolded to bring new players in And then we would have plenty of games that took that literacy and made assumptions about what players already know and are experienced with, and then not just like rest there. Don't just like um, sort of do the same thing, but build on that. Like take some risks based on assumptions that you've made, because that's the freedom that you get by making those assumptions. Mm, um, Half-Life 1 remake called Black Mesa. I have heard of it, but I don't really know anything about it other than I think it's a response to the fact that Half-Life Source didn't isn't a remaster of the game. It's just a port into the new engine, so it's using all of the old textures and models and that kind of thing. My understanding is that Black Mesa is sort of trying to do to update Half-Life to be a more modern looking game, at least. Um, when it gets fully released, will I play through it to compare to the original? Possibly. I don't. That's not right now like really super high on my priority list, but I am curious about. I'm very curious about the idea of um, translations of games, taking a game and trying to like preserve the core of it, not trying to create something new, but trying to put it on a new platform or update it for a couple decades later, a new technology. I think that's a fascinating field, and the art of translating games is really really interesting. So from that perspective, I'm certainly interested in it. But I don't have a history with Half-Life, right? Like I don't have a lot of investment in this series. So right now, I'm not feeling like I'm not super excited about Black Mesa. I also don't know that much about it. Is it a fan like remake, or is Valve actually involved in it? That's not clear to me. I'd probably be more interested if I like found out some of the background on it. Highly recommend fully doing the tutorial. It was made in the days when it was decoupled from the main game and gives some good info, like alt fire for weapons. Huh, is that a thing? I will do that before the next play-by-play. I'll just go through the tutorial. Actually, yeah, since I've already sort of started and gone halfway through it, I think I'll just do that. I don't know. I'll think about it. I'll think about it whether that should be part of the next play-by-play or not. Because it would be interesting to look at the design of the tutorial. But yeah, I forget. We ran into this with like King's Quest manual culture, right? I mean, there was a time when the expectations, so not just game literacy, but the way that gamers interacted with the product was drastically different than it is today. And so there were assumptions that were made in the design of that product that were based on they were totally fair assumptions in 1993 or 1995 or 1998. And one of those could easily be that you're going to play the tutorial before you play the game. Today, that is not a safe assumption for a designer to make, and so the game reflects that. That they'll design the game so that you don't need to do that because they can't assume that everybody's going to do that. Companion people seem more like objects in terms of interaction. You don't actually talk to them. Do you think this still allows for self-insertion despite Gordon having a history as a PhD scientist and rapport with almost everyone he meets? It does put it in an interesting spot. So I've always been skeptical of self-insertion. Not always, but certainly in the last several years, I've become extremely skeptical of the idea of self-insertion and how effective that actually is. Um, I find myself being much more emotionally drawn and connected, I guess, to characters that are not designed with self-insertion in mind. Characters like, Commander Shepard, who I can sort of define what she looks like, but she's got more of a backstory and I don't know if that's the greatest example. I mean, it is sort of the classic Bioware example of doing Mass Effect versus doing Dragon Age, or at least Dragon Age One. The level of like Dragon Age One is built around the idea of self-insertion, and so you have an unvoiced protagonist who you are supposed to be able to project into. A lot of first-person games go after the same thing. You can't see what the protagonist looks like, and therefore you're gonna be able to sort of picture them as looking more like yourself. I don't find that it actually really works that well for the most part. I tend to find that I'm much more interested in the characters who have their own life, and I end up being just sort of more emotionally connected to them. So Gordon's in an interesting place where he's kind of bridging both of these ideas. He's faceless, he's unvoiced. Like there's clearly a lot of potential for self-insertion going on for this kind of subjective storytelling. But like you say, he's got a rapport with all of these scientists. They know who he is. They recognize him. They refer to sort of shared experiences, or at least a lot of them do. In the first part, like they work together and they sort of talked like they work together. I don't know. I don't know. That's really interesting. I feel like those two ideas fight a little bit, at least in concept. In practice, in Half Life, I mean, I think the bottom line is that I don't feel emotionally connected to Gordon Freeman. And I don't know if that's because the ways that they're trying to get me to feel emotionally connected are failing, or if that's just not a priority. And it seems like my guess is the idea of a shooter with any kind of characterization, any kind of empathy between the player and the character in 1998 was a pretty novel idea. And today we have like really strong narratives um, that are presented in shooters. Um, I think we've learned a lot about how to do that and why it's worth doing, and we've developed more of an aesthetic standard that values that. I feel like this game, I don't know if that's what they're going for. Um, Manual culture from back when is fairly similar to wiki culture from today, in that you can assume players will play something like Minecraft with a wiki open in another tab. Yeah, Minecraft is a fascinating example because it does a lot of things wrong. And that doesn't matter at all. It's a fantastic game. It's a fantastic experience. All of the things that, like, you look at it and you say, well, this should be awful. Um, it's 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 wonderful. I mean, I love Minecraft, um, but you cannot sit down cold and play Minecraft. I mean, I would love to hear stories from people who did that or attempted that. I mean, it was a thrill for me to sort of just read along a little bit and learn sort of what I needed to know to survive the first night, and then explore a little bit and discover some things. And then, this is a new type of material that I've never seen before. I want to find out everything about it, and so I'll go to the wiki to like find out everything about it. Um, but it's interesting. Like a lot of games don't work like that, and I think that's a very cutting edge kind of way to approach game design. In my mind, it's sort of akin to the idea of uh, oh God, what is the name of the game? This like stream based gaming, or Twitch based gaming, like Twitch plays Pokemon, or there was a Kickstarter recently for a game that's entirely based around the idea that it's interactive between a player and the stream that's watching. That's a very like cutting edge way of approaching how people relate to games. And I feel like Minecraft does that obviously in a different way, but does something similar, where it sort of relies on the external technology of the fact that people are going to figure out all of this stuff. Like they can hide stuff in the game, and it will be uncovered by their legions of fans in no time, and then it'll be available to everybody. I have to ask, why did you feel so compelled to keep the parascientist following you alive? Was it hope for reward? Um, Possibly for narrative reward. I did not expect to get items or power ups or anything from them. Um, well, so there's two aspects to it. One is practical, which is the very first scientist that I met after the resonance cascade incident, said the scientists will help you. They'll open doors for you. He made it seem like it was important that I use these scientists to help me navigate the space. I needed to do that like maybe twice, and then and like right away. And then since then, I've never had to do that. I sort of feel like I uh, am not gonna have to do that again. So that was kind of a weird way to introduce that mechanic in a way that didn't feel localized. It felt global, and so it sort of felt like if there's a scientist, then maybe I need to bring the scientist with me because he's going to open a door for me. I no longer really actually believe that that's true, but it's still like that was my initial instinct, and so I still kind of do it. And then I also, I mean, I don't want to leave the scientists to die. I mean, when they inevitably get killed because they're following me around, I don't feel super bad about it because they're incredibly annoying and there's not really anything I can do, and they have no sense of self-preservation and they're not helping me at all. But we're trying to get out. Like I'd rather save people than leave them to die, I guess. Like if that's my option, if that's the choice that I'm weighing. Um, I actually, honestly, I feel pretty like callous and cavalier to not mind when they get stuck or get shot or get eaten by monsters. Like, I feel like I should really care more about that than I do. But I, I have at least some sense that yeah, I mean, I'd rather try to save the scientists. They're my buddies, right? They were so friendly to me in the beginning, or at least they were like professionally friendly. Like they knew who I was. I have a connection to them. Um, so having people follow you, I always tried to clear a reasonable way forward first, tell them to hold, clear the next, and then like go back for them. That totally makes sense. Like that I think is the way to actually get the scientists through with you, because if you just let them follow you, then they'll walk into bullets. Um, but yeah, I that almost seems like too much trouble, because I don't believe that they're actually mechanically valuable. So if it's a if the choice is between like I can press the E button and they'll follow me, and then I can feel like I'm like trying to help them get out, or I can not press the E button and they'll just stay behind, then yeah, I'm willing to climb that hurdle. I am willing to press the E button. But if it means that I have to like keep clearing out an area and then going back for them and like making sure that they stay safe, I'm not willing to do that. I don't have enough of a connection to them. It's interesting that there's a line and that I can sort of like draw a line somewhere in between those 2 points. But that's definitely like where the game has, I guess, engaged me emotionally. I guess that's what's happening. Um, was the scientist in the trash dumpster a metaphor for trashy bad science in the game, or am I looking too deeply? Interesting. Uh, I did not read it that way in the moment. I think that's interesting. That's an interesting interpretation. I guess I would see it more as kind of a juxtaposition between uh, the what we normally think of a trash can or a dumpster being for, and the fact that there's a human being in it makes everything feel sort of horrifically out of place and wrong. Um, but but you could definitely, I mean, like, there's clearly a side plot going on. It's not even a side plot, it's an undercurrent of Black Mesa is doing really scary stuff. And should it be allowed to do that? Probably not. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if I would like naturally call that trash science, but I can definitely see the connection that you're making. Could generic appearance contribute toward indifference towards the scientist? Yeah, absolutely, it could. That's great. I didn't identify that, but I think that's absolutely true. I think that if I felt like they were unique, if they had unique models, and so they looked different, if they had unique dialogue that gave them any kind of a personality, I would feel much more inclined to not just allow them to die. Because now it sort of seems like if I allow the white-haired scientist to die, then, well, there's going to be another white-haired scientist, like, kind of just up around the corner somewhere. Um, Having played through a large part of Black Mesa, they made the scientists far more likable and human, making it seem wrong to leave them behind. I can totally see, like, yeah, exactly. This is, um, there's a spectrum, and the level to which I guess the game is involving me emotionally has got me sort of really committed. Um, is the level to which I'm going to be willing to do things to in the name of helping these scientists, uh, regardless of whether or not there's a mechanical reward for that. And Half-Life is kind of, you know, just barely pushing that bar up. And there's stuff that you can do that I'm sure that they do in Black Mesa that would that would push that up further and sort of make me more emotionally involved, and then therefore make me sort of more willing to enact that narrative. Scientists not supposed to do that stupid cry over and over again. I'm glad to hear that, because that is like, that's super painful. I mean, like, it's hard to imagine what the design intent was behind like having them act that way all the time. So if that's a bug, then I can feel better about sort of writing it off as well. That there was no intent behind it. That's just not supposed to happen. Okay, I'm gonna maybe just a couple more. There haven't been any female characters in the game so far, have there? Do you think that's noteworthy? I had a picture of a child of indeterminate gender, I think, in my locker. And some of the voice over, like the voice from the tram from the intro was a female voice, right? I don't totally remember, but I'm pretty sure you're 100% correct. There have not actually been any female characters in the game. Is that significant? Well, yeah, it's significant. I don't know if it's indicative of like a real strong design intent. I think that the industry has become much more conscious in the last 17 years of how male-dominated games have traditionally been in terms of like their representation. And so it's much harder to use any kind of ignorance as an excuse today than it was back then. I think that's not a good excuse, even for 1998. But I'm also, I don't know how much intent to really read into it. I don't know that I'm meant to view this as a fundamentally masculine story because, well, I take it back. I think you could easily read this as a fundamentally masculine story, and I don't know if that's a problematic reading, but it's actually kind of, I'm going to think about that a little bit more. I don't know that there was, I don't know how much intent, I guess, to assign the fact that they didn't, model and put in female characters. Whereas today, I would ask some really hard questions about that. I don't know. It's hard for me to know exactly what the culture was in 1998. I don't remember. I mean, I was much less conscious of that kind of like representational issues. That's a really good question. I'm going to think about reading Half-Life as a like fundamentally masculine story. I mean, it's got a lot of really stereotypically masculine themes of playing God, trying to harness science, harness the unknown for selfish reasons, and having that sort of turn out badly, and then obviously lots of shooting. Like there's lots of masculine themes to it. So maybe there's a lot more intent to it than I'm giving it credit for. Okay, maybe one more. Half-Life series has a ton of stories scattered in overheard conversations, posters, newspapers, etc. Hiding the stories seems like it could detract from a standard player's experience. How do you draw this line? There's an art to it, I think, is the answer. Yeah, so environmental storytelling is the sort of catch-all term that we use to describe this kind of thing. What you might also describe as incidental storytelling. This is things that the player is not required to see, or understand or process, but that exist and are placed in the world such that the player can see them. And by sort of putting together snippets of overheard conversation and posters and signage and graffiti um, and audio decks that for some reason are scattered throughout the world because people keep audio diaries and just leave them around. That like you learn more about the world. That it's a world building technique. Um, Sometimes it can be incredibly heavy handed. Audio diaries are incredibly heavy handed. But they still accomplish the same kind of thing. They're something that like you can skip over if you're not interested in it or if you're not exploring enough. But if you are absorbed in the world, then they reward you by giving you sort of more world to be absorbed in. One of the things that I really like about this, and I think it's just a naturally reinforcing mechanism, but I think a lot of modern games take advantage of it. Is just that, like, the more you want to explore the world, the more you sort of care to not rush through and look in crannies and like look around, and not even like you can look in crannies for health packs, and then like scoot back out. But the more you like go to places that are just there because they're sort of interestingly part of the world and look around, the more you will see these story elements that build out the world further and further. So there's a self-reinforcing kind of virtuous cycle to the reward structure of these kinds of incidental storytelling, this environmental storytelling. The people who want to find it are the people who are going to find it. And people who don't care about it just aren't even going to see it. Which is great. Like, that allows for the game experience to kind of customize itself to different types of players. Yeah, so Irrational Bioshock does super, super, super environmental storytelling. The latest Dragon Age, I think, has had some really good environmental storytelling. It's mostly done through like ambient and incidental conversation, and then the mountains of text that is just findable in the world. Whereas like the Bioshock series tends to do it through graffiti and really interesting level design, like setting up scenes that describe something that has happened. Actually, Bethesda does a lot of that too. In both their Skyrim, Elder Scrolls, their Elder Scrolls stuff, and also their Fallout stuff, they do a really good job of setting up these little scenes that you walk into and you can sort of see how a story played out there. There's two guys over here that were shot in the back, and there's a guy over here with his gun drawn, and then I don't know, he blew up somehow. But you can like put together like what happened. Like, this is I understand a little story took place here, but you kind of have to look around and think about it in order to get that. So it rewards the player who's interested in doing that with sort of these cute little interesting stories that they would probably be interested in. Okay. Yeah, so I don't have an answer to like what is the line, like how do you balance environmental storytelling. I think it's more of an art than a science, and I think there are some modern companies that do it really, really well, and are worth studying how they do it. And I think Half-Life also does it. Like Half-Life 1 is doing some really interesting stuff with the like safety posters and the overheard conversations. Um, and Half-Life 2, as I recall, also does some interesting stuff that's a little bit more sophisticated. But it's all, I mean, I think it's mostly, um, you can't put necessary story there. You can't put plot there. You can't put, like, you need to separate out, like, this is narrative that is a clue to a puzzle or to some kind of a situation the player is going to be in. This is something that the player needs to know. You have to treat that differently than you treat your incidental storytelling. And then all of that environmental stuff is just designed to flesh out the world further for people who are interested in that. Awesome. Cool. This was a lot of fun. I'm excited to play more Half-Life. Like I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish it in February because there's only a week of February left. But I do plan on finishing it, possibly like the week after GDC. But we'll get through this game. I believe, and I appreciate you guys all hanging around and watching and chatting with me. This is a lot of fun. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.